Two is to simplify what we've got. And the third is to move it all to a class license, which is in existence for New Zealand for 3 years, and in France, I think Germany, and another country somewhere else. It's up and running, that concept, and as far as we know, without any big hiccups that we're aware of, but it's very controversial in Australia. And there are two surveys that input is asked for. One is ACMA's own, and time's running out to respond to the ACMA request for input. And in parallel to that, the WIA has gone out to all amateurs, members and non-members, makes no difference, with a survey asking for a response. It's important to respond because without the numbers, it doesn't have much meaning. A handful of individual opinions doesn't count against thousands saying the same thing. So it's the ball's in our court. What do we want to do? And to run through it all, Dale has put together a summary of what the issues are. At the moment, as far as we're aware, Dale, the majority opinion is no change. But that is not what ACMA is looking for. And they're under pressure. They've been directed. They have no choice in the matter. It's direction that they must modernise and simplify the way they do their business. There is no choice in that. The only issue is how do they do it. So over to Dale.
Thanks, Gil. This is largely a revision of what Gilbert and I presented last month. So the issue is, as Gilbert indicated, the class license for amateur licensing arrangement review or consultation. So it came out a little while ago, and the options, as Gilbert indicated, are 3. So leave the existing apparatus license, which we're all familiar with, simplify the apparatus license in some way, that's option B, or change to a class license, option C. So the questions you need to ask yourself: do you think we're over-regulated now? Is there too much regulation? And since the existing regulations don't seem to be enforced, what might change? In the consultation document that was published and the draft class license instrument, there are some good bits, there's lots of bad bits. So you need to think about, do the good bits outweigh the bad bits? And is there any negotiation about the bad bits? Overall, what is the best for the long-term outlook of amateur radio, how it's managed in Australia, how it's regulated in Australia? And we do need a win-win situation. We need to be willing to engage in this process. Lots of countries don't get to say in how their amateur service is regulated. We have a situation here, a Western liberal democracy, where people's views are taken into account. So take the opportunity to get involved. So, what's happened in a month? The WIA Spectrum Strategy Committee has met many times. I'm a member of that. It's had lots of very long meetings. Last night we're up to midnight, and that was just one of them. There's members of the WIA board. We've looked at the issues, we've decided what the main issues are, looked at priorities, how they should be addressed, and there's a draft response created. There's a WIA poll running to gauge the views of all amateurs. Now, admittedly, there's been some problems with getting that working properly, and I hope they've been resolved. There was a YouTube presentation a couple of weeks back. That was the first attempt to tell people what the issues were. I think that was generally well received. It was certainly a first for me, but I think it went reasonably well.
That's produced by WIA?
No, it was a fellow in Tasmania, Honeywood, VK1DSH, called HRDX or something like that, so it's independent of the WIA, but it had obviously WIA endorsement. It's part of the process here, looking at the main issues and priorities, the consultation document and the draft class license, with a lot of things unresolved. There's a lot of questions we don't know answers to. So we sent a letter to the ACMA seeking clarification on some of the key aspects of the documents. We haven't had a response yet, probably time's running out anyway. Now, so last night we completed the WIA response. It's 42 pages, it's quite long. There's an executive summary of about 2 pages which lays out the basic options. But then there's a whole lot of stuff, analysis of the issues, possible solutions, value and usefulness of the damage, so there's a whole lot of stuff that should be approved by the WIA board Thursday, tomorrow night. And what we hope will happen, expect to happen, is that as soon as it's approved, it will be sent out to members and put onto the WIA website. That's the timescale. Basically, it all has to be finished by Friday next week. That's the drop dead date. So what are the key issues? Interference, number 1. That's interference that we might cause other stations and interference that is caused to the amateur service. Second issue, a significant issue, is about equipment. Does the class license allow equipment to be homemade? Or can we modify commercial equipment? Or are we stuck with stuff you buy off the shelf, for instance? It's quite unclear. The nature of the class license indicates that it has to be commercially made equipment, but that doesn't fit well with the definition of the amateur service. That is probably interference and equipment are the 2 key issues in the resolution 2. EMR, so that's exposure to electromagnetic radiation, is the next big one. As it turns out, the amateur apparatus license fits under some other legislation called the apparatus license determination, which is a sort of an overarching piece of legislation covering all amateur licenses, all apparatus licenses. And it has in there a couple of things about EMR, and basically breaks down typical applications into 2 classes, Class 1 and Class 2. Most amateur operations are fit in Class 1 and it's deemed to comply, providing you're operating below a certain power level. We believe, without the additional information at least, that is contained in the documentation, that we remove that distinction is removed for the class license. In theory, it means we have to have a proper EMR assessment. That is a great concern because, first of all, it will be difficult and it may be expensive. So that needs to be clarified. Call signs, that was a huge issue that I had an appreciation of, and I won't go into it except that there's a lot of concerns about how call signs are allocated, how they're used, what happens if they run out of call signs, so issues about people hoarding call signs, visiting amateurs from overseas or even Australians visiting overseas. How do we deal with those issues in that sort of subsection? And there was a lot of other sort of more technical issues which were considered. So, it was much more complicated than I thought it was this time last month. Much more complicated than anyone on the Spectrum Strategy Committee thought it was. And it's probably much more complicated than the ACMA realised. So that's where it's at. So what we need to do, next Friday, close of business. It's all over. If you haven't got your contribution in by then, it's too late, so get to it. You need to understand the issues. Don't take it from me. Get the consultation document. Read whatever information you get. Beware of misleading information. Respond to the WIA poll if you wish. It's useful, but it's not mandatory, of course. But make a submission to the ACMA. Preferably we'll all agree on the main points. I'd like the club to make a proposal. And of course, you're dealing with a government organisation, you're dealing with a government agency, and there are real people there, so be polite, be well informed, but stick to the scope of the topic. Don't go off on a rant about everything that's wrong with the ACMA. That will get you nowhere.
When you say agree on the main points, Dale, so the main points you're suggesting is we should pick up the ones that the WIA
yes, so
is making in the main submission, and we can endorse those if we agree with them?
Yeah. So in terms of the ACMA, the WIAU, that's quite right. The WIAU, and this is subject to the final approval, I think this is what will happen, but it's subject to the board's approval tomorrow. but option A is that I must select, because the information that's been presented, option A is the only one that doesn't disadvantage us in some serious ways. Option B might be an option, but we don't have enough information to make a decision. So option B was simplify the existing apparatus license, which probably won't meet the ACMA needs. And as Gil said, this has all come about through the government's deregulation agenda. They want to minimise minimise the amount of regulation that most aspects of society and government is exposed to. So the idea is to get rid of old and outdated regulations, try and make things simpler for people. And that, as a sort of a viewpoint, a philosophy, is okay if it's done well. The issue here is whether this particular way of doing it is good enough for us. But as we've made clear in the contribution, or in the WA report, there may be opportunities to improve what's on offer. And provided we can get a collaborative and consensus-based approach, we might end up with something that's quite acceptable and to our advantage. But as it stands, on the information presented, that isn't the case. Much more work would be required. The WA document will also provide a model for future engagement with the ACMA. That was one of the questions they asked. So we're proposing some ways that we can perhaps meet with the ACMA. All interested amateurs and groups could meet with the ACMA to thrash out some of these issues both now and going into the future. So what next for all of us? We need to review, understand and think carefully about the issues. The WA will present its final submission and a template response in the next few days, so that should become available very soon. So there'll be a big document, 42 pages, as of last night, and a template, a 2-page letter basically, or 1 or 2 page letter, that you can download, put your details in and send it off, and that's all you have to do. Of course, if you want to write something more substantial, you can. I've done mine, it's about 6 pages, because I've gone into a fair amount of details on issues that I think are significant. Look at the poll and make your own submission, either using the WA template, which we made available, or your own document.
From a club perspective, as soon as we get the approved 42-page document, that will be published along with the 2-page template, and the club will likely make a submission very much along the lines of the WAA submission, and will of course talk to these 2 lovely gentlemen. It would be nothing greater for them there, but I don't think we'll have time to go out to the full membership of 151 members to say, does everyone agree with this? I'm personally relying upon the advice of 2 incredibly well-respected members of this club, but also of our amateur radio community.
That's a lot of good, right? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, mate. So I won't go through do you want to briefly go through the issues, or are you happy with this? Is basically it's a slightly revised list of what we had last time.
What changed from last time? Because I know your YouTube, the video we made for you last time was actually quite widely watched.
Okay, well, much of it hasn't changed. I've just tightened up a few things where we've become more aware of issues. For instance, the call site, the register of licenses, licensees and evidence of qualification. So you can log on to the ACMA website. There's the register of licenses, and you can type in VK1DSH and you'll find my name, my address, my license number, etc. And you can even print out a copy of my license. Anyway, that's fine. Under the class license arrangement, that will probably disappear. There will be no public register of licenses. So you won't know if you're talking to VK whether he's a licensed amateur or not. You have no way of checking. That's the first problem. The second problem is you won't have a license that you can use as evidence of qualifications if you go to an overseas country. How are you going to deal with that? Thirdly, for some things like echoing, you actually need to send them a copy of your licence to get access to it. How are you going to do that?
Same as DMR. Does the DMR require it as well?
So that's an issue. Bit about this one is about the class licence, the apparatus licence, legislation. And to be honest, I don't understand the difference in terms of the legislative layer. But my suspicion is that one is easier to change than the other. So the class license may be easier to change. I don't know, but the legislation will be different. The big sticking point is that the amateur service must not cause interference with radio communications. That's in our Apparatus license. Fine, we accept that. The class license, it says, to be fair, not in the draft instrument, but in the explanatory document, not cause interference to other devices, unspecified, what are devices, and services. So, that's very unclear. What is this devices? Does it mean if somebody's light down the street turns on every time you cab on HF? What does it mean? It's very unclear. What if they're at fault? What if you're an absolutely scrupulously clean station, but somebody's got some second-rate old radio that they're using and you cause interference to? What happens? It's very unclear in the class license structure. So that is probably the most critical point, and that's the thing that's got people most upset. But as I said, to be fair, this text doesn't occur in the license document, in the class license legislative instrument. But as a generic characteristic of the class license, it certainly applies. So some clarification of that is needed. The other thing for me at least, again, whilst not explicitly stated in the Apparatus license, we can make and use our own equipment. That's the nature of the amateur service. The class license may be more restrictive. We don't know. We've asked that question.
As in, have to buy a black box from an approved seller.
Or have apply to some standard even. There may be a standard that you have to comply with. I mean, there's a standard there in the sense there's some spurious emission limits in the amateur licence condition determination, which is fine. We have to comply with that. But it could be much more extreme than that under another arrangement. We don't know. As indicated, EMR is a problem, potentially, because of the potential impact of going to a class licence. We're about 50 to 52 megahertz, that's a sort of a niche thing. Similarly for the LF and MF bands, we really don't need additional power limits. You can sort of, and it's questionable if they're actually in the existing licence, Apparatus licence. There's a typo in the Apparatus licence. And it's very poorly phrased, so most people use the ARP, I certainly do, but it's explicitly stated in the class licence, which is not desirable. Also, the LCD, we have access to AX and call signs on certain days, so on World Amateur Radio Day and Anzac Day, whatever it is, you can use AX call signs. I think that the class licence is totally silent on that. Overall, there's proposed greater use of third-party providers for administrative functions. We've had issues with that. And there's a number of other unclear or poorly worded provisions that should be changed. But as I say, but to be fair, that also applies to the existing LCD. So, but it's the devil we know versus the devil we don't. So that's it.